Hello and welcome to another episode of Mr. Bennett's History Minutes. It's been a minute. But today I want to discuss some things that are currently in my possession and my collection. I'm a muzzleloading firearms enthusiast, a member of the National Muzzleloading Rifle Association, active on the muzzleloading forum and those sort of things. I'm privileged to have three mid-19th century guns to make this video about here. The first one is a Jamestown rifle from North Carolina. Did a video on this a while back, about almost 2 years ago now. I'm from North Carolina. I'm in North Carolina. I've got a map of North Carolina up on the wall there. So very, very partial to these North Carolina long rifles. This is from Jamestown in Guilford County in the Piedmont of North Carolina. This particular gun was built by Solomon Ward. He abbreviates his name S.H. Ward. It is on the top barrel flat, about, it's directly behind the rear sight. And when you're holding it on your right side, if the gun's on your right, you can read it across the top still. It's a little bit faint, but S.H. Ward, Jamestown, North Carolina. You probably cannot see that, but it's in there, somewhere behind that sight. The lighting's probably not helping too much. This gun is about 28 caliber. It's very small bore, and that's pretty typical of 19th century Carolina rifles. A lot of eastern rifles are typically going to be a smaller caliber by the time of the mid-19th century. This gun may have been made as late as 1900. People often think that muzzleloaders die out after the Civil War. They really don't. I mean, if people had something and it worked, just like today, they keep it going. And Solomon Ward's going to be active into the early 1900s, making these style of rifles in Guilford County, North Carolina. So I do not know, there's not an age, there's not a date on this gun. I'm going to assume that it's probably made post-Civil War, just because that's when Ward is most active. I think he's still an apprentice in 1860. I'd have to do some more research as to what he did during the Civil War, but I think he's probably going to be employed at one of the shops in Greensboro, producing rifles for the Confederate Army. But I'd have to look into that. That'd be a great thing to look into. This is, like I said, a typical Jamestown rifle. Some of the attributes, it's got, I like to call it a 3/4 stock. I probably need some better lighting here, but you can kind of see there now. It's not really 3/4 of the way. It's longer than your typical half stock by a little bit in terms of how the stock comes out there. You've got the last ramrod pipe here. And then on this gun, you've got about 4 inches till you get to the nose cap and the under rib. Then you have your two ramrod ferrules underneath. Very small front sight. Just a simple, I guess that's kind of a buckhorn style sight. I hadn't even really thought about that. Buckhorn style sight on the back there. Not as high and pronounced horns as we might see on some other sights. It's stamped with the Roman numeral 7 behind it. I think that's probably for just the size mold that or ball that this gun's designed for. Not knowing what that number is, I've heard it postulated that gunsmiths would mark a mold with a number, mark a rifle with a number, and have a typical size that they would call number, well, in this case number 7. But it comes out to be about 28 caliber when I've measured the bore, or at least at the muzzle, which may be a little larger. It's an old gun. I'm kind of thinking about restoring this thing one day, at least the barrel. The stock is pretty well gone. If I'm not holding it, it comes off of it. It's more the barrel supporting the stock than the stock supporting the barrel. We've got right in here a lot of rot that has happened, and this is more common on percussion guns than it is on flintlocks due to what I think the corrosion is going to happen right there from the cap going off, whereas with the flintlock you've got the pan and there's more of a fence there and different things, and it may just be the methods of how people clean their guns. This has been typical on some antique wall hangers that I found, but this gun, I mean, considering aside from that, and it's missing some things, it's not as bad a shape as one might think. But getting back to this, so this gun's made during the Industrial Revolution. And while we might think of this as very traditional, and it is, and it still shows their regionalisms in firearms production even during the Industrial Revolution. The parts on it, maybe the barrel was made in Guilford, but the lock is pretty typical of locks that we'll see all across the United States being used by gunsmiths during this time. It's got a set trigger, standard setup there, really common. You still see this style pretty regularly on various different guns, even ones built today. Really small, cheap piece right here. It's a simple little piece of brass for a washer there. I mean, it's not just a piece of brass, it's been shaped. Got a brass nose cap or end cap, brass ferrules on the under rib for the ramrod that is non-existent. I probably will eventually get a ramrod for this. The hammer is cracked. I've got another hammer I'm going to replace this one with and save the original, but I may restore the lock and may restock the gun one day. We'll see. I'll have somebody check it out first. Another thing that I have with me today to compare, I've got here with me, is a plains rifle from a whole different part of the country, really a different part of the world, and possibly these guns were made at times when they were in different countries. This is a plains rifle, half stock. I like to, one thing that distinguishes it from Jamestown guns, we've got this stock ending a little bit closer here. It's more of your typical half stock. You'll still see this on Hawken style guns today, and that's often what we think of when we think of plains rifles. We think Hawken, Sam and Jake Hawken out of St. Louis, Missouri, producing guns for the fur trade. This is more typical of that. Still a little on the small side compared to what Jeremiah Johnson and those types of characters would have used. But half stock rifle. This one, it's about a 34.5-inch barrel. My Ward Jamestown rifle has a 39-inch barrel, a little bit taller, a little longer. And this one, biggest difference is the size. This is just under 50 caliber, measured out to be a 48. It's 0.487 thousandths of an inch, but it looks smooth. When I've looked down the bore of this, it looks like it's been reamed out. The rifling was taken out. And that happened a lot of times with muzzleloading guns. It's not super common here in the South. You see that more in the North from what I've read. But yeah, that way you can then load it up with shot. Now this gun has definitely been shot a lot. It's coming apart at the seams. And let's see. It's been through a lot of abuse. So I'm going to bring this in closer so we have a better light on it. Let's see, there we go. See our nose cap there, it's poured pewter. We've got brass ferrules again, or at least one there. It's like maybe a steel one that's been rebrazed on there up here at this one, and then it's missing one here that was just in front of this sling swivel. It does retain a ramrod, appears to be a hickory rod. A lot of the stock is worn away, especially on the left-hand side, but it's a beautiful curly maple stock. I think my Jamestown gun is in ash, maybe beech, I'm not entirely sure, but this is definitely curly maple. Might not see it on camera very well. There we see some of that curl. It's beautiful. It would have had a key right here instead of a pin, and it appears like the escutcheons and everything wore away, and somebody put a piece of, like just a piece of iron, sheet steel or something, sheet metal, over that to help hold that stock together. Very heavy barrel, thick barrel on this thing. Could be restorable, I'm not sure. In the hands of the right gunsmith, and of course with light loads if it was to ever be shot again. But most of these percussion guns, where they really need a lot of work, is back at the breech, around the drum, and the nipple. I've not tried to remove the nipple on either of these guns. You'd probably have to take out the whole drum and rethread everything there. Once again, we've got a lot of, everything's basically tore up here. Oops. Tore up, mess up my gun or my table. We're looking at a 19th century table that may have been made in this part of North Carolina as well. Me and my wife actually cut our wedding cake on this table and bought it from our venue. But we've got a different type of sight on this gun. We've got an adjustable sight. It's missing the ramp that would go in here, but it is adjustable for different windages. It's marked on the top flat. The gun is of G. Spangler, Monroe, Wisconsin, warranted. The barrel itself, I found someone online that has one of these that was passed down to their family, said that their barrel was marked Remington. I've not taken the barrel off the stock of this one, mainly because of this right here. I've not seen any other markings on this barrel, but it is known that Remington made rifles or made rifle barrels and rifle locks, and people bought them. The lock on this gun is very similar to the Ward gun, very similar. But once again, we get into the differences. Let's get into the differences. This, I've never seen a trigger like this on a percussion gun. I've seen it on some Jaegers from over in Germany. A little bit slimmer, kind of a stick kind of trigger, front trigger. This is set trigger. You pull the back one, and then you've got your hair trigger in the front. This gun, the tang used to come down, but here's the biggest difference. I'm going to go ahead and get to that. We see our cheek piece again, but one thing about this gun is, I'm going to aim it here. I can't see my sights unless I go up like this. It's a big drop right there, so whoever had this must have been tall. I know the stock's cracked, but I can put it together enough that this is the drop that's been on this gun since it was built. So maybe it was built for somebody much larger than myself, but it's I mean, it's comfortable. It's actually comfortable to hold like this and to look at it without even having anything touching the stock. And I know from a little bit of research that a lot of early guns had this kind of drop. You know, back in we're talking like early 1500s, a lot of arquebuses that were designed for holding on the chest, they're going to have this kind of drop where you don't actually really aim it. There's a guy on the muzzleloading forum, shout out to his handle is Puka Bunduk or something like that. Canadian gentleman, I believe, who's a wizard with matchlocks and built beautiful arquebuses. And one of his threads talks about that drop in early arquebuses. But I'm going to assume by the mid-19th century, we're talking more of, this is influenced by probably a larger person from what I'm going to guess. But it just reminds me of that when I hold it like this. And I've seen another Midwestern gun, I can't remember the smith's name. It's one that I saw in an antique shop years ago that had even more drop. It's almost Jezile looking in a way, like those Afghan rifles. But I'll have to dig it out, a muzzle blast or something. I've seen something in one of those about a smith who made a gun very similar. Maybe there's one of my muzzle blast magazines, or maybe a thing about Mr. Spangler here. I know he was active in the 1850s. I think that's when he starts building guns. I think he's active until, I want to say, 1870s, 1880s. Have to look back at that. I've only looked at one or two sources. Actually, only one source now I think about it. It's not done much research on this yet, but I wanted to show those differences. How even though the locks are about the same, they may even be from the same company. Most smiths are going to import their locks. It's just by the time of by the late, let's say 1860s, 1870s, 1850s, even 1840s, even, and even before, you start seeing people importing locks a lot, and they did that as far back as the colonial days. Most American gunsmiths were really gun stockers, gun builders, and they might make a barrel now and then, they might make a lock now and then. They're doing more repair though. When they really build a gun, they're building it. They're taking components and putting those together. Now they'll make all the other things that I'm not knocking any craftsmanship, because I'm no smith, I'm no builder yet. Maybe one day, but anyhow. So this is my Spangler rifle. It's a plain style rifle. The hammer is actually, unlike my Ward gun. The Ward gun has everything, all the internals to it, except it doesn't have a half cock notch, which I think starts to be kind of common in later muzzleloading guns, especially with set triggers. I assume they carried them because they're cap guns at that point. They carry them with the hammer down on a cap. Pretty dangerous to do, a lot of people will say. Different ideas about that. I won't go into that. But so you don't have a half cock notch. This one does have a half cock notch in there, and that's about it. The mainspring's missing in this one, so we can't operate the action there. It's loose hammer there. But this gun has seen so much use. Its days are done, especially the stock. The trigger still seems to be functional as a set trigger. I'm not going to mess with it again. I messed with it once. Don't want to risk breaking anything. But this gun has seen some abuse. It's got a Phillips head screw down here holding what's left of the trigger guard on, which is mostly there. Looks like the bolt going through the tang is too large for this. I've dialed it back a little to take some pressure off of the bow here of the trigger guard. Last thing about this gun, most interesting feature. I'm going to talk about this. That's beautiful right there. But it's got a cheek piece on each side. And I've not seen that on a gun before. I was doing some research on the muzzleloading forum, and a guy who has an Ohio rifle made by a different smith had double cheek pieces, but I've not seen much else about that, so that's something I'm still looking into. It's also a lot more swoop to this, and I don't know if that's maybe Germanic influence. Spangler's a German name. Being out there in Wisconsin, more Germans coming recently from Europe during that time after the 1848 revolutions, and that may have influenced this. But so we can see those differences between these two 19th century American guns, American rifles. We've got our long and tall and small caliber North Carolina rifle over here, and then we have our larger caliber plains rifle. Move that out of the way there. About a 39-inch barrel, about a 34.5-inch barrel. 29 caliber or 28 caliber roughly, and about 48 caliber. Not quite what you take into the Rockies for grizz, but it'd probably do it. It'd do it if you hit it right, but Hawken guns are a little larger. So these are American-made guns. They're very similar in a lot of ways. And by the mid-19th century, Industrial Revolution's full swing. People are switching pretty heavily from flintlock to percussion, and then by that time, by the time of the 1870s, you've got people switching to cartridge guns. Average people, especially rural people, common people, guns are not as prevalent back then. They're more expensive than today. Not as prevalent as today. It's prevalent. I'm not saying they didn't have guns. Obviously, got two of them here. But I think a lot more people hung on to their muzzleloaders than we commonly see in popular culture. But anyhow, Industrial Revolution and cottage industries kind of combined still during that time, at least in terms of rural gun building. Now I've got something else though that I know on my board over here I said surprise. So I'm going to show you all a surprise. So these guns, 19th century American percussion guns. Across the water, over in Kingdom of Morocco, this was being used and built. This is an Alpha Dolly, thanks to Rick from St. Louis on the muzzleloading forum, who has helped me with that, with figuring out things about this. This is my Alpha Dolly. It is a Moroccan snaphaunce musket. It's smooth bore. This one's about 52 caliber, and this one, the sear doesn't work, and the lock plate's warped. I wonder if this is the right lock plate. I've taken out the back screw that wasn't really even holding anything when I got the gun. I've taken it out. Gonna eventually fix that, fix the plate, take it apart, that kind of thing. The sear needs to be fixed, because what this does, this is kind of like the Ward rifle. There's no half cock on it, but this one's not designed with one ever. This type of gun, no half cock. 15th or 16th century style mechanism. Starting in the 1500s, you start to see these traded into Africa for all kinds of things, for natural resources, for enslaved people, various things. These guns traded from primarily this style by the Dutch and the English. I think this is an English style. I could be wrong. Snaphaunce experts out there, please comment below to help me out. But the way this would work, it's a muzzleloader like any flintlock muzzleloader. It has a pan to it. So you pour your powder in there, close the pan, but the frizzen, in this case a battery, instead of a standard hammer, is separate from the pan cover. There would be a rod underneath here that when the cock is pulled back, that allows that's going to power the flint and everything. There's going to be a rod on the inside behind the lock plate that as this falls forward, that rod engages the pan cover, pushes the pan cover forward, and then as the flint's striking this, creates those sparks, and it falls down there. Our sear that comes through here that catches the tail end of this here, it is worn down so it won't actually catch and it won't stay. So that's something I'm going to work on one day, or have somebody that knows better than me work on. But this is 1500 technology used in the same time that this is around. Golly, it's so much heavier. This plains rifle is a lot heavier than this Alpha Dolly, even though the Alpha Dolly is, let's see, how tall it is compared to the plains rifle. It's going all the way out of the frame. I'm 5'8", and this gun is just a tad under that. I think it's like a 52 or 53 inch barrel. So this just goes to show that in other parts of the world, the Industrial Revolution hadn't really gotten there yet. And what bits of it were there, it's different. Yeah, very different. I mean, we're talking muzzleloaders here in the 1870s in America, 1850s, 1860s. I'm going to say 1870s because I've been teaching the Reconstruction in my classes here recently at school, in my U.S. history class. But anyway, we know that alfadalis like this and mukalas, which are very similar, are made in Morocco into the early 1900s I've seen. This gun could have been made anytime between the early 1800s to, and possibly earlier, I mean, 1600 or 16th century technology here. Parts of this gun may be 300 or 400 years old. Most likely, though, it's made in the 19th century. Probably the last half, from what I've seen from a lot of ones in museums online, they're dated as 1850s, 1880s. So we're looking at the same general time frame as our two American rifles here. But it shows us that difference, and as a world history teacher, I like to point out that muzzleloading is not an American thing. It's everywhere. One day I'd like to get myself a Vietnamese flintlock rifle as well, but I want one from everywhere. But so we see this in other cultures. Every culture has muzzleloaders that it can be proud of, that people can learn about. So if you're of Moroccan descent or if you're of Wisconsin descent, it doesn't matter. This is a sport and a hobby and a artistic culture for everyone with roots all over the world. I'll do a video sometime about my Brazilian native trade gun from the 1960s that I got recently too. But anyhow, we've got a bunch of cultural designs on here. I think there is maybe some Arabic script on one of the barrel bands. I'm not quite sure. No, I shouldn't say that. No, there's not any. There's not any on there, from what I can tell. But there are definitely some motifs there I need to check into. But these were made roughly the same time. But the technologies are different, and the things that make those different, it's history. It's the Industrial Revolution. It's what's going on in these different parts of the world. At that time, is Morocco part of the Ottoman Empire in the 1880s? It might be. I can't remember. I think it's the Kingdom of Morocco at that time. But that's something to look more into. I don't know everything. I'll admit that. But these kind of objects like this can really tie us into that history and can tell us about what's going on in the world, what's different in different parts of the world in the past, and even into the present. Today, alfadali and mukala guns like this are still used in different parts of Morocco. Some of them in this configuration, and some of them with percussion cap ignition systems have been converted, or their new ones have been made. A lot of them are made as non-functioning replica guns. And maybe this one was cobbled together. This might not be the original lock for this gun. That may be why it doesn't entirely fit the mortise. But it's, anyhow, these are reminders that cultures across the world have done muzzleloading, have put all kinds of effort into creating beautiful, beautiful pieces of art that also function as weapons for defense or as tools for hunting game or celebration. Getting back to what I was talking about with Morocco and modern Moroccan guns, the Fantasia event that is sometimes performed in Morocco. People have converted these to percussion cap mostly now, but some of them may still be snaphaunce. They ride their horses. I think they're mostly riding barbs, breed of horse there, maybe Arabian horses too. And they fire these off horseback, firing blanks. But it's a fantastic thing. So the French called it Fantasia when they were learning about it and all that in the 19th century. And these still have a role in that type of ceremony. There's guys that actually have had these rebored, brought over to the States and fire them, target shoot with them. This one would need a lot of work. I would have to have somebody rebore it. The inside of the barrel's just trash. And that's okay. I didn't buy it thinking I'd shoot it. Just like these other ones here. They're pieces of history that we're looking at today. Now, maybe they'll be restored. Maybe there's still some life in them. But they can still tell these stories and explain to us what our world was like 150 years ago. Thanks for watching Mr. Bennett's History Minutes. Remember to like and subscribe, and maybe I'll make some more of these. I encourage you to get into muzzleloading if you're able to. There's ways to get into it for anyone, even if that means for now just researching and learning and watching videos and connecting with people through forums and learning about it. Whatever your culture is, I guarantee you there's some way you can find connection to this sport, to this history, and just to if anything, just to get out there and realize what human beings have created, the artwork that goes into things, from this type of finial to or ferrule to these types of these bands. Some artist, an artisan, made those choices. The styles of stocks between this and the ward rifle that I've set over there. They tell stories. There's reasons they're different. Different people were involved. They're influenced by different things. Got different purposes. When this gun's built in Wisconsin, I think there's still bison in Wisconsin at that point. When the ward rifle's built in Guilford County, I think the biggest game's turkey at that point. Most deer are gone from the western Piedmont or from the central Piedmont by that point. There may be some every now and then, some deer, but that's primarily guns for squirrels, rabbits, and turkeys. I've seen some people call those turkey caliber guns anyhow. But yeah, so all these things they've got different attributes to them that remind us of their history. And they explain a lot to us. If they could talk, they could tell us a lot. So thanks for watching Mr. Bennett's History Minutes. And it's Mr. Bennett's History Half Hour here, I guess. Like and subscribe. Give me some questions in the comments. And if you know anything about these and can correct me or add to it, please comment below. Thank you, and have a good one.